let's take a look at number as language. Over the years, I've been more and more sort of seeing things in terms of language and being able to appreciate more deeply how powerful language is and how powerful that way in which our mind works is. We have these things on the surface. We tend to think of things in terms of like, well, we're using words, we're using grammar, we're using numbers, whatever it happens to be, we're communicating ideas. All energy continues. It doesn't just disappear, it goes somewhere. So like waves coming up on the shore, that energy is being dispersed into the land. It doesn't just stop dead. It transmutes into some other form of energy moving forward. One of the things that I was going to say as well is that like even with language, I'm talking right now, I'm using vocabulary and grammar to speak with, but I'm not specifically thinking about every word as I'm saying it. I have a feeling of what I want to say, and I've been speaking for long enough in English that I know how to transmute that into words without having to think about all the moving parts. If I had to think about grammar and sentence structure, vocabulary and all these things, I'd stop dead in my tracks and you'd see me translating in my head the whole time. But that stuff with use ends up sinking down and being able to, it connects with other levels of the consciousness that work in tandem with it. So the idea that we're only in, this intellectual sphere is a limiting idea that neglects a lot of the other stuff that's going on. Now, as we try to look at this number system as a means of actually communicating ideas to ourselves or to other people, or gleaning things from texts or wherever we're getting them, or using them for magical practices, or for communicating with spirits if we're doing some kind of magical working or astral travel, we need to actually have these numbers mean something to us. We have to start to use them as a language. We become fluent with these words that are expressed by number. I think Crowley talks about the idea that we're reducing words to a mathematical level so that they become simplified and rarefied. That's one way you can think of that. Now I wanted to look at the Sefer Yetzirah because this is a purportedly ancient text. It's questionable exactly when it actually was written and who by, but it is incredibly influential for the Kabbalah. What we get from this will help us to see the evolution of the tree of life, which becomes an important system for categorization and language and expression and all these spiritual ideas that we use. So the first chapter of Sefer Yetzirah introduces right off the bat with 32 mystical paths of wisdom, engraved Yah, which is the name of God, and then he goes through a number of names of God and expressions of the name of God. But we have 32 mystical paths of wisdom, and this already gives us the basis on which to build a system, a map, which is where we get our tree of life from. I did want to bring up 32, ends up giving us 32 paths that will produce 10 numbers, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, ending with our friendly little yud, and 22 letters, which is the number of the Hebrew letters. So that's where we get 32 from. 32 also, as Araya Kaplan, who published this version of the Sefer Yetzirah with his commentary, his vast commentary, he also points out at some point that 32 is the enumeration of the Hebrew word lev, which means heart. And I find that interesting. It's a two-letter word, lamed beith, and I find that interesting because this is a bit of a side tangent, but I just wanted to bring this up again as another little Gematria thing. In the Book of the Law, Nuit says, "Be thou Hadit, my secret center, my heart and my tongue." And in another place she says, "This shall regenerate the world, the little world my sister, my heart and my tongue, unto whom I send this kiss." So heart and tongue comes up a couple of times, and I decided to try translating that into Hebrew, heart and tongue. Heart gives, of course, lev, 32, and tongue ends up being lashon, which is 386, and you add those two together, you get 418. That may not mean anything to you. You might sort of start to be wondering if I'm crazy, and you'll get a lot of that today. And it's debatable whether I'll resolve that difficulty for you. But 418 is an incredibly important number within Thelemic discourse, particularly in the Book of the Law. It is the enumeration of that word abrahadabra that we saw earlier. And it comes up in a couple of places in the Book of the Law. So I felt like 418 must be important. And I don't have a complete thing, like doctrine behind this or anything like that. But I wanted to bring it up because I thought, hey, maybe heart and tongue, my heart and my tongue. If Nuit is talking to us and saying, referring to my little sister as my heart and my tongue, it seems like my little sister is the world. And that kind of says heart, it must be the 32 paths maybe. So whatever Lashon is in 386, I have yet to figure out. As I mentioned, we have 32 paths. It's the 10 Sephiroth now on the Tree of Life, which are also, Sephiroth is the Hebrew word meaning countings, or I think there's a couple of ways in which you can define that. But the root of it is a three-letter root that also works with, actually I'll go back for a second because the three-letter root is Samek Pei Resh, and it's also used for a few other words which are in here. It's Sepharim, which is books, Sefer, which is text, and Sephar, which is number. And in fact, it's even used for Sipur at the end, communication. So it's different permutations of the same root. But we have the 10 numbers for the Sephiroth. So, of course, we use decads, presumably because we have 10 fingers, and we can use those to count on, and that's the origination of our base 10 system of numbers. Other bases are possible, but we have 10 Sephiroth, and then we have the paths connecting them, which are 22, and we attribute the Hebrew letters to those paths. We also use the tarot trumps to attribute to those paths, and the tarot pips, as they're called, or the small numbers, will stack onto each of the Sephiroth. The court cards get attributed in a little bit more of a side thing. It gets really complicated really quickly, and this is the biggest danger of this talk, is like how much of a tangent I could go on. The whole thing is basically a tangent, really.